Hi, I'm Anthony, and welcome to Cybrary.it. Today we're going to be talking about connecting different peripheral devices and their types of connectors. I'm your local subject matter expert here for A+, so let's go ahead and get started. When we're talking about connectors, one of the most common ones that comes to mind, and one of the ones that we need to make sure that we cover, is going to be the USB connector. Now, USB stands for Universal Serial Bus, and it's the connector that you're going to see most common on USB devices, and now they've even been integrated into keyboard, mouse, and by USB devices, I mean like the flash sticks that people carry around in order to save data on there. Now, USB devices are starting to take over everything. It's replacing a lot of different connectors that we've previously used, like the keyboard and mouse used to use the PS2 connector. Now, many are being replaced by keyboard and mouse to help standardize things. The USB connector comes in actually three different types. That's going to be the USB 1.1, the USB 2.0, and the USB 3.0. Now, these different types actually give us different speeds. So let's take a look at that and see if we can make sure we narrow down those speeds. The USB 1.1 connector transfers data at 12 megabits per second. And the maximum length that we want to have our cable for our USB 1.1 connector is going to be about 5 meters. Our next step up is going to be our USB 2.0 connector. This steps up the game from the USB 1.1 connector and actually gives us a speed of about 480 megabits per second. The distance for the cable length is, again, also about 5 meters max. Our next one is going to be our USB 3.0 connector. That's going to give us about a 5 gigabits per second connection speed. Again, we're right there at about that 5 meter mark. The USB 2.0 and the USB 3.0 actually have sort of nicknames that people may call them by. The USB 2.0 you may see as called the high-speed USB connector, and the USB 3.0 you may see as super speed. Now, there's one more type of USB connection that we need to mention. It's not necessarily its own version of USB connection, but it's the USB type connection that low-powered devices are going to use, such as our keyboard and mouse. Now, this USB connection, we'll just call it low-powered, is only going to be transferring data at about 1.5 megabytes per second. And when we're talking about cable length for this particular connection, we only want to have about a maximum of 3 meters. So we see out of all three of the previous connections that we have, when we're plugging in like a USB keyboard or a USB mouse that's wired, it's going to only transfer data at about 1.5 megabytes a second, and we don't want to extend that more than about 3 meters of cable length. With each different USB types, not only do we have just 1.1, 2.0, and 3.0, but we also have what's called A and B connectors, A and B mini, A and B micro. Now, those different connectors are not only different sizes, but different shapes. So it's important that we discuss those a bit and determine the differences between those. Our standard USB-A connector is going to be probably the most familiar connector that you've seen. It's the one that you see on most flash drives, on your USB keyboard and mouse. It's widely renowned as, it's the cable that you can plug in only one of two ways currently, and you got to make sure that you line it up properly and put that in there. And that's going to be that small flat connector, the block at the bottom, and then we have the pins at the top. We have an example of that connector right here. This is going to be the most common connector that we'll see, and it's fairly standard across most of our computers now have these ports on the front and the back. The USB-A connector comes the same in the USB 1.1, 2.0, and 3.0, so it's pretty much standard across the board. The USB Type-B connector, however, is different for our 3.0 as opposed to our 1.1 and 2.0. For this Type A connector, this is standard for 1.1, 2.0, and 3.0. Our Type B connector for our 1.1 and our 2.0 is a little bit more of a square connector. See how the white connector that we have here is a USB 2.0 type connector. It's a bit more blocky than our standard USB-A connector. That USB-B connector is found a lot of times on older external hard drives. We may see it on different media devices, or you may notice that it's quite often placed on printer devices. And usually our printers that have that may come with a USB Type A to Type B cable. For a little bit bigger illustration, our USB Type B cable for our 1.1 and our 2.0 is going to look similar to this. And then it'll have its block in the middle. Both the Type A and the Type B do have mini and micro versions. You may notice a lot of times when you're charging your phone, that's actually going to be a USB micro cable. They're basically just smaller versions of the individual type of cables, and they're used in different situations. If we have a phone that we need to recharge, it's kind of impractical just to have a standard USB-A type port on there, because it would take up almost an entire size of some of the smaller phones now. But with the mini and the micro, it still allows us to have that data transfer. It still allows us to charge and power our devices with having a smaller connector port. Now, USB 3.0 has two Type B connectors. It has the standard, and it also has a micro. We'll notice that the standard connector will be a bit more blocky. We don't actually have an example of one here to show, but it'll be a bit blockier connector. It'll be a bit larger connector. But we also have a micro connector, and on a lot of our newer external hard drives, we may see that the actual connector that's on the hard drive end is a Type B 3.0 micro connector. We do have one of those here, actually. This is our Seagate external hard drive, and we do have a small USB 3.0 Type B micro port right there. And our cable that plugs into it is on this end. It just plugs right in. It has a keying notch so that we put it in the right way. And for a little bit of a bigger size, you're going to be looking at a connector that's obviously a bit smaller than this one. And it's going to look like this. And of course, I'm not the greatest person in the world to be doing drawing examples, but it's always good when you're studying for exams or trying to become more familiar with the different types of connectors. You can always do searches, or you can always don't have to go out and buy every single connector, but it's good to actually at least see several pictures of connectors. Or if you're studying for an exam, maybe make flashcards with the name of the connector on the front and a picture of the connector on the back. That way, if they show up on an exam, or show up in when you need to actually do troubleshooting, or you need to order a certain cable for a work environment, then you'll know which cable that is and you'll order the correct one. When we see the USB symbol on our computers, or on the side of our computers, or even on packaging, we'll be seeing a symbol that looks similar to this. Now, this USB symbol right here can help us to determine, say, when we're looking at the side of our laptop, or we're just looking at the face of a computer, it very obviously makes it clear that this is a USB connector here. Sometimes we may see it with a plus if it's a high-speed USB port. And again, the high speed is going to be our USB 2.0 ports. Or if it's a USB 3.0 port, we may even see it with an SS next to it, designating our super speed. So if you've ever plugged a USB device into your computer and it says, this is a high-speed device, it may function better if you plug it into a high-speed port, then you may want to check on your computer and see if you have any ports that have the SS or the plus symbol on them, designating that they are a super speed or high speed port.